really help you on your farm to test out questions and ideas, questions that you've always wondered about but never really had the resource to test on farm. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Innovative Farmers, and then we're going to watch a short video describing one of the field labs that's currently taking place in the Thames catchment. And then we're going to go on, and I'm going to introduce my three speakers here today who are all involved in one or another field lab that's going on or has gone on in the last 12 months, all of them looking at soil health and practices that improve soil health on farm. So some of you may not be aware of Innovative Farmers. There's some information about the programme on your chairs with reports on field labs that hopefully will be interesting. The programme's now in its 7th year, and as such at the moment we've got something like 70 field labs going on across the UK on a whole range of topics, really from, as I guess at one end we might say looking at mastitis typing. We've got a group of dairy farmers in the south of England looking at how they can reduce their reliance on antibiotics through actually finding out what the causative organism of the mastitis is in one day, rather than needing to send a sample off, all the way through to field labs looking at how to combat flea beetle in oilseed rape, which is getting a lot of attention at the moment, where we've been testing sheep grazing as an alternative to chemicals to deal with flea beetles in oilseed rape. So this morning, as I say, we're focusing on soil health, and I do have to ask a question, or at least tell you this. We will be taking photographs. If you don't want to appear in one of our photographs, can you just come along and tell one of the team so we can, I don't know what they're going to do, airbrush you out. And I would actually ask all the team from Innovative Farmers if you could just stand up so people know who you are. So we've got Hannah, Jerry, Emma at the back, and Dan with us today. So just don't hesitate, but go and speak to any of them. And under your seats, I think they're under your seats or indeed on your seats, you've got an ideas postcard. We set up an ideas map back at base, which is just outside the seminar barn, and it's already looking pretty busy with lots of ideas that you've posted for things that you'd like to test on farm. So please, as the morning goes on, don't be afraid to just fill in something and then take it back to our stand. And what we're doing is we're pinning them on the board and linking them to where you're from. So if your area of the country isn't represented, then get one up there. Okay, so that's enough from me by way of introduction right now. What I'd like to ask now is that we show the short video about the field lab, which is currently taking place in the Thames catchment area. Thank you.
So this is a sample of our no-till soil of our first year using no-till. We can see lots of big wormholes, but it's still very cloddy and fairly hard to break, which is why most farmers run a cultivator through it and do it mechanically. But what we're hoping for is that all the biology are going to do it for us.
The reason for no-till is to leave the soil undisturbed so that the soil health can increase, but the changeover can take quite some time, which is why we're giving it at least 5 years so that the farmers can see if it does actually work for themselves.
After those 5 years, I'm hoping to see a lot healthier soil and hopefully producing better yields. We won't be using so much fuel to bring our costs down as well.
The exciting thing about this project is Thames Water is taking the risk by funding the inputs, which means that the farmers can try it without worrying too much if they're going to be losing a lot of money because they're trying it on their own.
Working together has been really good. We're learning from each other, especially with our WhatsApp group. Oh, I need to ask a question, I'll put it on there and you get a group discussion.
In farming you feel very isolated, and having these sort of groups, you get amongst people and discuss things, it's a lot of help.
They've got the scientific support, but the independence of being their own masters, if you like, which I think farmers are much better at anyway.
I think farmers are great at innovative things. You know, we ought to have more say of what we ought to be doing.
We can put all our ideas together and learn from 3 fields instead of 1.
Thank you very much. So now I'd like to introduce you to the 3 farmers and the research, actually 2 farmers and a researcher, I should say, an advisor, who are going to really start this discussion going. And I don't think I probably need to say this to any of you. I've seen so many tweets from Groundswell, but if you want to contact us on social media, please feel free. If you include the Groundswell hashtag and @ifarmers, then that's another good way of getting in touch with us. So what's going to happen next is I'm going to really ask the 3 people here to tell us about what they've been doing over the last few years, as well as telling us a bit about their farm and why they got involved with Innovative Farmers. And so firstly, I've got David White, who's a farmer, an arable farmer from Cambridgeshire, who's, I would say, really, from my experience of working with David, so interested in testing things on farm. And we were lucky enough that David got involved with the cover crop management field lab that took place over the last couple of years across in east of England, where David really worked very hard to make sure that his cover crop trial did very well indeed, and no doubt David will be telling us something about that in a minute. Then secondly, Mark Lee, who's an organic farmer from Shropshire, organic for the last 20 years. I guess a bit different to David because Mark's a mixed farmer and he's been involved in a number of field labs looking at different ways of managing crops through intercropping, companion cropping, that kind of thing. And I know Mark's going to tell us more about that. And then thirdly, Rob Saunders, who works for Hutchinson's as an advisor and consultant to fruit and hop growers across the whole country, Rob, or mainly in the west? Mainly in Kent. And he's going to tell us about his involvement with a field lab looking at how to improve soil structure within hop yards. But firstly, David, if I could start with you, if you'd like to tell us something about what you've been up to over the last few years and also your farm, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm farming 400 acres between Cambridge and Newmarket on light land, fine sandy loam over chalk. So most people say, well, that's perfect for direct drilling. You've got easy land, haven't you? But every kind of land has its problems, and with anything with some sand in, it's not naturally restructuring like perhaps some of the heavy land is. And so part of what I'm doing with catch crops and cover crops is with direct drilling is to try and keep the structure in the soil and hold more moisture, and that's part of the reason that I embarked on no-till. One of the first things that made me think that I needed to do some trials on farm, and I'd worked with NIAB hosting variety trials over the years, so I was used to mucking about a bit, was drilling winter wheat in the first autumn of 2015 into a 4-foot high, quite dense cover crop that had been glyphosated off, and then saying to the agronomist, or the agronomist saying to me, we should put a pre-em on here. And I said, well, do we need to? Well, I think so. And we've got a huge mass of green vegetation. I said, well, will it work? Well, I don't know. I'll ring somebody else. And he rang somebody else, and he didn't know. And you start to think, well, I'm sort of a bit on my own with this. We ought to do some experiments. So we cleared a 6 metre square of green vegetation off and sprayed half with a pre-em and half without, and mucked about just to see actually what we need to do. The second incident was with desiccation of overwinter cover crops for spring drilling. When do you desiccate them? And so I did a series of trials and timings with different glyphosate rates to try and prove what suited my system on my farm, because nobody else had done the work effectively. So that's sort of how I embarked on my journey, and then got involved with you guys and keep doing trials on the farm every year ever since.
Thanks, David. So, David, if money were no object, what field lab would you really like? What would you really like to test on farm if you could? Your fantasy field trial.
Well, at the moment, I'm really interested in companion cropping with oilseed rape. I'm in the area of the UK, top of the M11, where the cabbage stem flea beetle hotspot was and started, and I know it's spread to more of the country now. A break crop, as I'm not growing sugar beet anymore, oilseed rape's an important break crop for me, and having visited farms in France, I've seen what they're doing over there, and I'm doing work with bits and pieces of various companion crops, but I'd like really to do a much more thorough trial with many more other varieties, and it's not about actually are they winter hardy or not, because we need to kill them, because actually with rape being a poor mycorrhizal host for the soil as part of the rotation, actually I'd quite like to have some plant species that carried on growing with the rape through the next spring and not interfere with harvest, but be there doing something good for me. So a field trial of all sorts of things to help combat flea beetle and help with the soil health through the year.
Okay, lovely. Thanks for now, David. And secondly, I'd like to ask Mark if you could say a little bit about your farm and the field labs that you're involved in, and really how you find farmer-led research. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. I'm 450 acres in Shropshire organic, as Liz said, in our 20th year organic, so just beginners, really, intensive organic. A very diverse farm, or I like to think that it is, and I always say that, but I think I'm in fairly good company with that today. Mixed farm, cattle and sheep. The principle of organic is through everything, of diversity rather, is through everything, and we're trying to solve problems either before they emerge or when they emerge, and diversity is usually the solution to that. Cropping is mixed. We grow wheat and oats. The wheat is more diverse than ever. We're growing 15 different wheats this year for milling. That's a trial in itself on a marketing level, really, rather than a growing one. Peas, all the peas are human consumption peas. The peas have taken me into probably one of our more interesting trials, which was under Diversify with ORC last year and this year, which is companion cropping of peas with triticale in my case. We grow peas of 3 types, all for human consumption, some of which are awful for standing power, the worst of the worst, really, in terms of peas. And we thought about it for years. I did a scaffold crop, a sort of a structural scaffolding crop. After the disastrous harvest of 17 in the rain, we went for it last year with triticale, had the most fantastic summer, so it didn't really show us as much as it might have done. But I learned enough last year from that trial to want to do it again, and we've changed the rates, the inclusion of trit, and it's looking promising, and if we have more thunder coming in the next few weeks, maybe it'll prove itself this year. So that's an interesting one. We got all the data from that last year. Other things, much of the farm is under trials at any time. We try things. I think trialling is addictive. Every trial we do seems to give rise to the need to do 2 or 3 more. And I have to be very careful that we don't end up with the whole farm into trial of some sort. Much of it is at any time. Buckwheat trial this year, fodder beet in its 2nd year, trialling organic, everything else really.
And Mark, what would you say is the most perhaps surprising but helpful thing you found out so far from testing things on farm yourself?
I think wheat varieties, we got involved with wheat variety trials last year with Live Seed, which is an EU thing. Growing wheat organically, growing modern wheat varieties organically is a big problem, as many people know. Modern wheat varieties have been bred obviously for a high input system, and absolutely the opposite of what we want in an organic system. So we've grown really disillusioned with wheat, and on the point of giving up with wheat 2 or 3 years ago. And that's the ability to try wheats on the farm. We always used to try a variety, but just try one extra variety for 1 year, which never really shows you very much. By trialling half a dozen varieties over a number of farms, we're able to learn a lot more quickly and apply that. So we have applied what we learnt just last year immediately, which would be foolish not to.
Okay. Thank you for now, Mark. And now our third speaker, Robert Saunders. Robert, could you tell us a little bit about your day-to-day work and your involvement with the hop cover crop field lab? Thanks.
Okay, my day-to-day work as a field agronomist, I concentrate on actually just 3 crops, and they are black currants, vines and hops. And our field lab, we called it the Hop Soils Project, and we started it because hops soils have faced effectively a perfect storm and the perfect storm is actually driven essentially by verticillium wilt. So when you harvest a hop plant, you take away all of the green material out of the field. So you take it to the machine shed for thrashing the flowers off. And because of fear of reinfecting with verticillium wilt, nobody spreads the hop waste back onto the hop yard. So that's storm one. Storm two is that it is the ultimate controlled traffic crop in that they take a lot of looking after. So you're running tractors through the alleyways 12, 14 times a year, irrespective of conditions, because you need to control the diseases. So that's pretty hard on the soils as well. And the MAF advice since the 1980s to control verticillium wilt, given the consideration that very many weeds are alternate hosts for wilt, is to maintain the hop yard free of all weeds at all time. Now, I probably don't need to tell this audience the adverse effects of leaving soil bare over winter, and how impossible that task is to achieve anyway. So farmers started to realise they had a problem, and started to try and import organic material. But certainly in my part of the world, where there isn't very much livestock, organic material isn't so easy to get hold of. If you do find some, it's pretty slow and expensive to spread it. And if you do embark on the operation, invariably you're running heavy kit on wet soils. So in some ways you're not helping. But I had the really simple idea, why don't we try and grow some organic matter during the winter in situ? And we set out, cover cropping isn't new, and the benefits to be derived from it are fairly well understood, but we set out actually with one hand tied behind our back, to the extent that with this worry of verticillium wilt, we were confined to growing monocot, cereal type cover crops. Very many broadleaves that you might choose as cover crops are alternate hosts of verticillium wilt as well, and farmers wouldn't thank me for introducing alternate hosts into their fields. So we started out really not knowing what seed rates we'd need to use in the indifferent seed beds that you can create in a hop yard, and we didn't really know either how to terminate the cover crops. We're a couple of years into the project now. We started out by doing a baseline assessment of soil health in our monitor farms. We've got 2 monitor farms in Kent and 2 monitor farms in Hereford, and one of the spin-off benefits that we've seen already, that was actually rather unexpected, was that where you successfully establish a significant cover crop, and you glyphosate it in the spring before the hop's growing, and you roll it flat, actually that takes care of your weed control in the alleyways until, well, we're the end of June now, and the growers I see still haven't needed to either respray or cultivate. Most of the people who aren't growing cover crops have cultivated by now. And I'm very conscious that every time you run a bit of steel through soil, you're promoting the breakdown of organic matter. So I love the Innovative Farmers Group concept, because farmers are innovative people who know exactly what the problems are, and very often to find that bit of knowledge, that bit of information, to plug that knowledge gap, it doesn't require a £300,000 research project at a station somewhere. It actually requires a bit of coordination and a bit of a focused approach on farm. So we spent our Innovative Farmers grant on a couple of things. We bought a couple of little seeder units. We've got one in Kent and one in Hereford that are shared out between the group. And we've subsidised seed a little bit so that growers can get involved at zero risk. And our plan is over time, clearly it's a long-term project, but our plan is to follow up and see what we can achieve with soil health simply by switching on the soil biology and introducing a bit more organic matter.
Thanks, Rob, as an introduction. That's really, really helpful. And actually talking about preventing soil compaction, I think, is really sort of apposite at the moment. I don't know if many of you have seen the reports coming out, the IPBES report that came out beginning of May, saying that, you know, we really can't tackle climate change unless we reverse soil degradation. And then the Environment Agency report recently talking about soil problems in this country. So this topic is so timely in terms of, you know, what can we do as farmers to safeguard soil health and improve it in some cases. So, sorry,
Perhaps I can chip in by saying my 2 monitor farms in Kent are now so enthusiastic about the procedure that after just 2 years, they're actually now planning to treat their entire hop acreage next year.
Wow, that's amazing. And I was going to ask you, Rob, do you think there's enough known about farmer-led research and enough support for it from all parts of the country?
No, not at all. I think innovative farmers have got off to a great start, but with a limited budget, it's very difficult to adequately communicate actually what's possible and what the approach is.
Okay, thank you. So really now, whilst you're all thinking of the questions you'd like to ask the panellists and the kind of things, you know, that you want to know about, I'll just tell you literally the sort of outlines of how Innovative Farmers works. So it's a programme, as Tim Field said right at the beginning, it's a partnership programme between Organic Research Centre, LEAF, Innovation for Agriculture and the Soil Association. And it's put in place simply to support farmer-led research, to really help farmers to test things on farm. And the programme provides support really all along the way with a group coordinator as well as a researcher who's interested in the topic and can help the group to design their trials, not to tell them how to do it, but very much to help them design your trial and also help with monitoring what's going on and making sure we monitor things that really are helpful. And as Rob mentioned, there is a research fund to actually help with some of the cost of research. And as was mentioned on the film, what that does is sort of take away some of those barriers for individual farmers. We find tends to be most helpful where that money is used for either doing some monitoring or the actual analysis of samples, or as Rob mentioned, to buy some bits of kit that otherwise perhaps a farmer wouldn't want to buy on their own. So there's a research fund available, and it's relatively small scale at 10,000 maximum, but what, again, as Rob said, very often it's small things that are needed to help farmers to actually take that step to starting their own trials on farm. So I think at this point, I've got loads of questions I want to ask, but if you want to ask the speakers anything, or if indeed you've got questions about Innovative Farmers, just put your hands up and we'll start the discussion. And if not, I shall ask a question. Yeah, yes, sir, with a blue pen.
Hi, I'm Graham from CPRE. I wonder, given we just heard Robert Cookville speaking, I wanted to ask him the question. That was talking about the new environmental land management system and the money that's going into farming. What would you want as a support from that future system to help you with this kind of innovative work that you're doing? Do you see that as part of that package in the future?
Shall I answer this? Or yeah, they were looking at me. So, thank you. And it's really interesting because obviously we're talking to DEFRA and to government about this topic. And some of you who read the Health and Harmony report, which came out, gosh, it feels like such a long time ago now, must have been last summer time. That report actually gave specific voice to the benefits of farmer-led research. And we were delighted because we felt that actually this meant that there would be more support in the future for this kind of research. And we're still very much talking to Innovate UK and UKRI, which is the organisation which distributes research funding. And you might be interested to know that the annual UK budget that goes through UKRI is about 450 million per year. However, in order to be an eligible applicant for the main fund, you have to be a research institution, which means that for Innovative Farmers, we'd have to team up with a research institution in order to be able to apply for those fundings. There is going to be some funding, and this bit I'm not so happy about. The plan is from 2021, this was a DEFRA person saying this, not me, that from the savings from scaling back of BPS from 2021, some of that will go into a fund for more support for farmer-led research. Now, for me, that feels like robbing Peter to pay Paul. But it compared to the UKRI research budget, it's tiny. And I have to say that there's an increasing number both of research institutions and really agricultural organisations, including organisations like NFU, even AHDB, who are wondering about whether the current way that research funding is managed is the best way forward, and wanting to look at how we can bring farmers into the centre of that rather than being on the periphery as they now are. Okay. Yeah, of course you can. Go on.
Yeah. Whilst not being one to willingly turn money away, I think the farmer-led research on farm is a really great initiative, and farmers like myself and others, I'm sure, are prepared to put in the work and make the effort. But what we do always need is some kind of support behind to quantify what we've done, and if there's a group that work together, as we did with Innovative Farmers with the glyphosate